New year means the January transfer window is now open, and with that comes transfer gossip, which, to be honest with you, hasn't been loads of. I don't think we've been linked to that many players just yet. There could be a few reasons for that. Maybe we've stopped the leaks, maybe we're not going to be spending any money, or just maybe there's been a lot of football on recently, which means the journalists are focusing on that. Could be a coincidence, but there have been a few, one or two alike, and we'll be getting stuck into the transfer gossip next week after the Manchester City game. But regarding West Ham's transfer window, the big story in the last 24 hours hasn't necessarily been anyone we might buy or we might sell or recall. There's a lot of that going on, but actually who's in charge of West Ham's transfer window, because the reports are it's going to be David Sullivan. Now, I've got a bit of an unpopular opinion coming up here, but it's my honest opinion. But before we do that, let's start with the news story. And that is David Sullivan is unhappy with West Ham's summer transfer business. And as a result, he's taking charge of the January transfer window. Lopetegui and Tim Steidten will still have an input. They will still have a say. But David Sullivan ultimately, and more importantly, will have the final say on potential targets for West Ham in the January transfer window. Now, before I get into the unpopular opinion which is attached to that, just want to point in the direction of our Patreon. We haven't promoted it much in the last couple of weeks because content's been down a little bit because of everything going on in my life. But now I'm settling back into normality. Content will be increasing again, so I no longer feel like a fraud asking you to join up to Hammers Chat Patreon. Various different reasons you could do that. It could be to support the channel. Myself and Gonzo try and upload one video every single day on both channels, so you get 2 free videos on YouTube every single day. Without Patreon, wouldn't be possible. You get more content over there. There's videos that are on Patreon only. Player Ratings is the biggest show that we do, and we've also got a podcast where myself and Gonzo discuss life, nothing to do with football, nothing to do with West Ham. And I think it's quite nice when things aren't going great with West Ham. There's a podcast there that has nothing to do with it, but there's various different content over there. And thirdly, it could be just for the prediction competition. It's something I think is underrated over on our Hammers Chat Patreon. Every single West Ham game we have the prediction competition, and we have some good prizes up for grabs. And this weekend I'm going to tell you what the prizes are, and hopefully it will persuade you to give it a go, because you can give it a go for free. Now, I told you what the prediction competition is. This weekend, regardless of which tier you are subscribed to, if you're the overall winner, you will win this shirt, which is signed by Sir Trevor Brooking. There you go. It's obviously the replica of the 1980 FA Cup winning shirt, signed by the legend himself. So if you're a supporter tier or mild addict and you're the overall winner, you will win this shirt. But if you're an addict and you're the overall winner, you will also win a captain's armband signed by either Julen Dix or signed by Mr. Paulo Di Canio. You can pick which one. There you go. If you're a trialist, because you can try Patreon for free, just go to patreon.com/hammerschat. You can give it a go. You get a week's free Patreon. Check out all the content, see what you think. If you're a trialist and you win, you will win a signed copy of Jimmy Walker's book, which came out just before Christmas. Anyway, promotion over and done with. Patreon.com/hammerschat. Links in the description. Massive thank you to anyone that gives it a go. No longer feel like a fraud promoting Patreon, which is a nice feeling. My unpopular opinion. I think a lot of people, when they've seen this news that David Sullivan's going to be taking charge, I think the general consensus will be, well, he never really gave it up, did he? And I've seen a lot of it. Well, of course he does. He's always been involved. He can't help it, blah, blah, blah. And here's my honest opinion, which I don't think will go down too well. I actually think he's been quite hands-off for quite some time now. If you go back to the summer, we've all played the game of who signed who. Who's responsible for this signing and that signing? We've all been playing that game. I feel like since we started YouTube on Hammers Chat, I've seen people doing it, and before that as well. Basically, since Sullivan's been here, he's always meddled in the transfers. I think that's fair to say. Sam Allardyce has spoken about it, how you'd turn up to training and be some random South American striker waiting to train with the first team. Hang on a minute, who's this guy? A Sullivan present, I think it was described as a gift from David Sullivan. That's what's been labelled as in the past by the likes of Sam Allardyce. So there's always been a who signed who kind of thing around West Ham. Even when David Moyes said, I've got the final say, I won't work under anything else. And to some extent, I do believe him. But it doesn't mean that Sullivan didn't pick players and recommend players to Moyes, and Moyes just agreed to go along with it. That could still have happened. But if we go back to the previous summer, so summer 2023, 2 years ago now, we signed Kudus, Alvarez, Mavropanos, James Ward-Prowse. Were any of them David Sullivan signings? I don't think so. I think Mavropanos was a Tim Steidten one, James Ward-Prowse was a David Moyes one, and there's debates over the other two, which I'm not going to get involved in, but the debates are, was it Mark Noble, was it Tim Steidten? But no one's saying it was David Sullivan. So I think it's fair to say that summer 23, Sullivan didn't really get involved too much. Let's go to January 2024. Still last year. We signed Calvin Phillips on loan. I know. I think it's fair to say that wasn't a David Sullivan signing. We tried to sign other players, which I don't think were David Sullivan signings either. So I'm going to say that in January 24, I think Sullivan was pretty hands-off then too. The summer that's just passed, we signed 10 players, 10 permanent signings at West Ham United. I think one you can say was David Sullivan, and that was Somerville. The other 9, I don't think it was. I think it was either Tim Steidten or Lopetegui that wanted those players. So out of the last 3 transfer windows, we've made, what's that, quick maths deal, 15 signings, including Phillips on loan. 15 signings. I think only one of them can be put at David Sullivan's door. So I actually think he's been pretty hands-off in the last 3 windows. Even if you were to go back before that, Danny Ings, I think that might have been a David Sullivan signing in fairness, but you could keep going back and debating it. I'm not going to go that far, but the last 3 windows, since Tim Steidten has been here, and this is what's pivotal to my discussion, since Steidten's been at West Ham, I actually think Sullivan's been, here's your transfer budget, I'll let you get on with it. I don't think he's been too bad in that regard. I've got a lot of issues with David Sullivan. This video, by the way, I appreciate it's coming across as defensive of Sullivan so far. That's not going to continue. I've got a lot of complaints about David Sullivan, plenty of them. But in terms of the transfer windows, I actually think he's done his job in the last year or so, which has given Tim Steidten and the manager a transfer budget and saying, do what you want. And Somerville, it's not the worst signing in the world, is it? I don't think it is. And to be fair, because of the deal we got regarding the contract of Somerville's contract with Leeds United, I don't think it was the worst deal ever. If he was to be a failure, I still think you'd recoup most of the money back. So out of the 10 we signed in the summer, he's looking like one of the better ones so far. So I can understand why Sullivan's getting a little bit itchy feet to some extent. But I don't think the summer transfer window was that bad in terms of signing players. Wan-Bissaka, I think, has worked out. That's a good signing. Kilman, I think it's been a good signing. Todibo, difficult one. Looks like an all-right player. And I think the transfer, you have to separate, in my opinion, you have to separate the transfer from the current situation. And the current situation was, he's allegedly had a falling out with Lopetegui. And I think that's been proven by his lack of involvement. Doesn't start games, but comes on in pretty much every single game. I think it would suggest that the claims that there was a bust up between them at halftime of Arsenal, I believe those rumours. So it doesn't make it a bad transfer though. If Steidten brings in Todibo and Lopetegui falls out with him, I'm not sure how that's Tim Steidten's fault. So I'm going to go neutral on that one, say null and void at the moment. Rodriguez hasn't worked out. And I think that was a bad transfer from Tim Steidten. Not to realise he would struggle in the Premier League, I think was naive. There could be an argument that maybe under a different manager he'd play a bit better. Well, that doesn't matter. Tim Steidten brought him in, or Lopetegui brought him in. One of them brought him in, knowing that Lopetegui was the head coach. So that's inexcusable as far as I'm concerned. So that's a bad transfer, albeit low cost. Carlos Soler, I think he's looking okay. I'm going to go in the middle of that one. Getting better. Somerville looks okay. Has looked quite bright in some games. Has looked lightweight in others. Jury's out for me. Fulkrug, it's a bad transfer, but only because of his injuries. That 4-month period of being absent hasn't helped. Good player, bad transfer. Guilherme, West Fodringham, it's worked out to some extent. He's a free keeper to be third choice at West Ham. That's what he is. I think you've got to put a tick to it, but also the easiest transfer to do in the summer. And then we had Mohamedou Conte, who we don't know about, so we've got to leave that one. The Guilherme one's the funny one, and this ties in with my opinion that Sullivan may take charge of the January transfer window. It's too soon. Guilherme, I think, is one of those transfers you'll have to judge in 3-4 seasons' time. You can't bring in a young player and then judge him immediately. And you've got to be really patient with this Guilherme signing. I don't think you can truly judge this. Obviously, if it works out, or he leaves West Ham immediately, you can say, well, that was a good one or a bad one. But what we've seen so far, which is very limited minutes, and I'm a bit sort of frustrated about the lack of plan to develop him, because he's not even playing minutes for the under 21s. That's the frustrating thing. Maybe we'll loan him out in January transfer window. I don't think we can now with Bowen. He may pick up minutes with Bowen's injury. There's always positives. Sometimes you've got to look harder, and Bowen's injury is one of those that you've really got to look hard to overcome the fear that the Bowen injury brings. But Guilherme picking up minutes is one of the good things that may come of it, as well as Kudus and Somerville. But Guilherme, I don't think you can judge him this season. I'm not even sure you can judge him next season. So the summer transfer window, I don't think it was that bad, actually. It wasn't great, but it's not been that bad. And it could get better as time goes on, but it could also get worse. But I don't think it was terrible enough to say, well, Tim Steidten, that's it. You're not getting any money to spend. January transfer window last year wasn't good. You know, Steidten, in my opinion, literally negotiated with the wrong agent over a player who ended up going to Brighton, and that deal was confirmed almost immediately after the January transfer window was completed. He agreed this deal to move to Brighton. So he really got the January transfer window wrong, Tim Steidten. Only Phillips came in when Al's Benram and Thilo Kehrer went out. That was a bad window. As Charlie said, you've got one job. January transfer window, come out of it stronger than you went into it in terms of your squad. We didn't do that. But I just think it's too soon for Sullivan to pull the rug on Tim Steidten. I'm in the middle of Tim Steidten. I think he's done as I expected. I don't think he's been fantastic. I don't think he's been terrible. I think it's jury out. But I need to see more. And I think when you have a director of football, sporting director, technical director, the guy in charge of the transfer window, I don't think you can judge him 4 months after the window closes. I think that's a bit... You can certainly, to some extent, you can. But I think you've got to give them longer, give the signings time to bed in. Because I think most people, when you bring in players, especially from abroad, most people say you've got to give them a bit of time to get used to the Premier League. But if that's true, then you've got to apply it to how long you wait before you judge the signings as well. And I don't think it was the worst one ever. And this window's an important one, I think, for us. We get it wrong, we could be in a relegation battle. We get it right, I know people will laugh, but we could be fighting for European spaces. I know it sounds wild, but we're not that far off 8th, and 8th could be Conference League football. You get a signing like a Bowen, a Souček, or a Jesse Lingard, that adds points and plural to your total and gets you up the league. You bring in a Calvin Phillips or a Danny Ings, and suddenly, whoa, you're looking over your shoulder. Get it wrong, and the consequences are severe. And I assume and I hope that we've been doing scouting and planning over the last few months going into this window. And if that's the case, I just don't think you can rip those plans up yet. You cannot just say, well, that's scouting you've done. We're going to put out the window. Sullivan's in charge. We're going to bring in players from the Championship. And now I'm not against that policy. There are some bloody talented players in the Championship this season. A few of them I would not mind at West Ham. But if you are going to take control away from Tim Steidten, I think you've got to go the full distance. And you've almost got to demote him a little bit. So basically, you're the head scout. You're in charge of that department. You identify players. You bring players to me. But David Sullivan is the one that ultimately makes the decision. I think Sullivan had a bit of an issue last season with the control between Moyes and Steidten. I don't think neither party were happy with how West Ham were doing transfer business. I think Moyes wanted complete control and Steidten was involved. And I think Steidten wanted complete control and Moyes was involved. It wasn't good. I think Sullivan caused it. I don't blame David Moyes and I don't blame Tim Steidten. I think they're both well within their right to demand full control of transfers last season. Both of them. Moyes is that old school manager that's been in control of transfers at West Ham largely. Tim Steidten rocks up and it creates an atmosphere. Tim Steidten comes in as technical director believing that's his role, to be in charge of the player recruitment. He said it himself that it was a bit different to what he expected and what he's used to. So we had this clash, and it was because of Sullivan not taking charge of that situation. He allowed these two important people at the club to almost clash over the control, and Sullivan sat there letting it happen. Steidten's had control now, and I just fear that if Sullivan's going to go back to, well, I'm in charge, he's now going to be in dispute with Tim Steidten, and I don't think that will help Lopetegui either, having those two going at each other. Sullivan, there's no need to get involved in this transfer window just yet. Yes, the summer one might not have been perfect, but I think you give Tim Steidten this one. If you bring in somebody being in charge of player recruitment, you can't give them one summer transfer window and that's it. You've got to give them longer. If you're setting up a long-term plan, you've got to stick with it long-term before you truly evaluate it. I just think it's too soon to give up on this. Like I said, I am unconvinced it has worked or will work, but I need more evidence. I think it's way too soon to be calling time on this one. If Sullivan's getting jittery feet, then look at the bigger picture. It's not just because of Tim Steidten. It's not just because of Lopetegui. It's because of your leadership or lack of leadership, really, and how you run West Ham United. And I feel like Sullivan's just one of those kids that take the ball home when things aren't going well. You know, you go play football down the park with your mates, and the guy that brought the balls in a huff, so he's picked it up and he's going home so no one else can play football. I think Sullivan was that child, really. And I think sometimes you see that. And I think this, if true, is an example of that behaviour from him. It's too soon. Let Steidten have this window, because the budget ain't going to be big, whatever it is. It's not going to be massive. So this is where good directors of football cut their teeth. Can you bring players in on loan? Can you bring players in that are under 10 million that can impact West Ham's season now? Can you do it? It's a difficult thing to do, but West Ham did it with with Thomas Souček originally alone, with Jesse Lingard. Can Tim Steidten do it? That's his job this January transfer window. Small budget, big impact plays, because if you're good at your job, you're good at identifying talent, then you should be able to do it. And this is where I think when you sign Max Kilman for 40 million and you go sign Aaron Wan-Bissaka, who the world knows about, and you go sign Füllkrug, a German international that had a good run in Champions League, you're not unearthing gems here. You're the pearl diver. Let's see a pearl in January, please, because it's now the fourth transfer window you've been here. We're yet to see one. We haven't seen one yet. And I think if Sullivan gets involved, any chance of seeing one disappears. Like I said, I'm not confident we will see one, but I want to give him the opportunity. Sullivan, stay out of it. Let Steidten have this window. And if he gets this one wrong and come the end of the season, you can evaluate the summer transfer window better because you've got a whole season's worth of evidence. Then you can decide. But for now, do what you've been doing. I believe you've actually been quite hands-off. Given the budget, sit back. And if he's going to fail, if Tim Steidten's going to fail, let him fail on his own terms. Because I think the last year he had a difficult situation with David Moyes. That's gone now. That issue's gone. And I'm saying the issue's in two people wanting control, not Moyes personally. Old school manager was an issue for Tim Steidten. That's gone now. He's had one transfer window. Give him another one. Then in the summer, evaluate him. Live or die on your own sword, Tim Steidten. If Sullivan meddles in this transfer window, I don't think you're allowing him to do that. Anyway, that's my thoughts on it. Possibly an unpopular opinion, but I do genuinely think Sullivan's been pretty hands-off in the last three transfer windows since Tim Steidten's been here. It's a big transfer window for West Ham. Get it right, we could get up the league. Get it wrong, we could be in a relegation battle.